I think UK intelligence has come out in the last couple of days and said something like 1,000 Russian soldiers per day are dying. So, Scott, I want to get you back in here just to, if you could comment on what you've made of how, especially Western intelligence, you mentioned David Cameron literally talking to Donald Trump to try to get him to change his stance. I mean, a lot of this seems desperate, but at the same time, it's being portrayed as this kind of, I don't know, PR ploy for making maybe the conflict look better or look like it's going better than it actually is going.
Well, let me put it this way. Russia today is suffering the lowest casualty rate that it has since this war began. They are so overwhelmingly dominating the front lines right now. You're literally at the point where, it's not 10 to 1. We're talking 20 to 1, 30 to 1, 40 to 1. So for every one dead Russian, you're going 20, 30, 40 dead Ukrainians. It's just totally out of balance. The Russians are accumulating military power every day, massive quantities of troops and equipment. British intelligence from the very beginning, they're first of all, let's understand this. If it's really, really good intelligence, you don't release it to the public. The fact that British intelligence, first of all, normally speaking, why is intelligence getting in the PR game? It's not their job. Their job is to inform decision makers. Okay, so the way it should work is that British intelligence briefs, the decision makers, the customers. Then the customers sit there and take that intelligence, and the customer goes forward and starts saying, we believe that the Russians are suffering very high casualties, da 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 da. But with British intelligence coming out, you automatically know that they're in the information warfare game, and their job is to spin. But who are they spinning? I mean, I would imagine that the Russian high command has a good idea of what their casualty figures are and how many people they're losing on the battle. They don't need British intelligence to tell them what they're doing. Putin doesn't need to hear it from British intelligence. The Russian people certainly don't believe British. So British intelligence is impressing whom? A Western audience. For what purpose? Russia doesn't care anything about the West anymore. Nothing. They don't care what we think. They don't care what we eat. They don't care what we dress like. They don't care what we smell like. They just don't care. I mean, they'd like to be friends with us, but they don't wake up in the morning and go, gosh, what is the West thinking about us today? I mean, could you imagine that somebody waking up in Vladivostok tomorrow going, I wonder what British intelligence is saying about how many casualties we suffer today? They don't care because it doesn't matter. So I don't know, I think sometimes we in the West get caught up with our own, our own propaganda, the information warfare that we're waging against ourselves. And then it leads to discussions, talks about, if Russia's, it slants the dialogue in a completely unrealistic way, one which allows Lloyd Austin to say stupidity like he did in the United States Senate, because the vast majority of Americans are listening, going, when he goes, we believe that there's hope that they could do this. They're going, yeah, because the Russians are losing 1,000 guys a day. And therefore, Lloyd Austin's right, man. 1,000 guys a day. And they listen to other people. Russians have lost half their tanks. They got no tanks left, and all this stuff. No, Russia's got more tanks they know what to do with right now. They're equipping not just the forces in the special military operation, but the expansive, rearming that they're doing elsewhere. Ask Finland how it feels to have a St. Petersburg military district with 70,000 Russian troops now being formed opposite Finland. Well, we joined NATO and now we feel less secure. Broke the code. I get tired of, I go on X, I go on Telegram, I read all the Western, spinmeisters. And it's totally irrelevant. It's so far removed from reality that and then what are you supposed to do? Engage with them? How do you engage with stupidity? When people have bought into a lie, it's one thing to try and talk to somebody who's willing to listen and learn and has facts to put on the table, because then I can listen and learn. But when you engage with these people, they'd have nothing to back up what they say. And so, the engagement goes in a different direction that's just counterproductive and not conducive to anything. So I've given up paying attention to what the West says because it just doesn't matter. What I learned a long time ago, and I was taught this by Ray McGovern. We all know Ray, good man, former CIA analyst, a briefer to the President of the United States, and Ray believes the same thing I did during the Soviet Union. Ray worked for an entity called SOVA, Soviet Analysis. I actually think Ray predated SOVA. That's how old he is. But he said, we had a whole bunch of guys whose job was, to read the tea leaves, sip tea, throw it down, read and see what's going on in the Kremlin. You get that photograph of the Kremlin people, and you say, who's standing next to Brezhnev? Oh, last year he was 5 removed, but this year he's 3 in. That means this, that, and the other thing. And McGovern's like, why? Why don't you just read the Soviet press? They had this thing called the Foreign Broadcast Information Service, FBIS, that every day published a thick composite of translated newspapers, radio, TV broadcasts, all there in the public, it's all publicly available. And when you read it, and you can do it today because you read it today and you go, there was no spinning here. There was no watch what I say. There was no BS. There was no, lies. They were telling the truth. It's just that we never took the time to learn to listen. We just assumed everything they said was a lie. Russia today is organized in the same way, the same philosophy as was the Soviet Union. When you have the Russians come out and give a report, it's truthful. It's factual. That doesn't mean that they never spin. Of course they spin. Everybody spins. But they're spinning facts. They're not spinning fiction. And that's the difference. And so, all we have to do is listen to the Russians. They will tell us what's working, what's not working. And it's just a far more accurate way to go about assessing what's going on than this fantasy world that's being crafted by the West.
Yeah. I went on this network a while back. I went on a network with someone who was this person was I forgot which president she was an advisor to, but she was one of these, intelligence advisors with what do they call that? That Avril Haines is in charge of, but the intelligence circle right around the president. And at that point, I realized that something was very much amiss with these people because they asked me a question and I answered. And when they asked her, she was like out of breath. When they said, well, Vladimir Putin said so-and-so. And she was like this, literally, you can't believe anything he says. Everything he says is a lie. And she's doing all of this, like going on, and Putin's a liar, blah, 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 he's the demon. And I thought to myself, first of all, you need to calm down and catch a breath and get a drink of water or something before you choke yourself to death. And secondly, how can you evaluate things rationally if you start off in basically saying the adversary is a liar, everything that he says is untrue, you can't believe anything he says, which means that we have to come up with the scenario. We have to say this is what Vladimir Putin. Well, remember, there's no such thing as Russia. There's only Vladimir Putin. We have to come up with a person. It's Maduro. It's Assad. Oh, you're an Assadist, an Assad lover. It's Putin. It's whatever, right? You come up with a person and demonize the person. The country doesn't even exist anymore. There's no Russia. It's just Putin with these people. But I didn't say a lot. I said what I had to say, but I realized that these people come up with a narrative. And if facts come about that could possibly do something to disprove part of their narrative, they just attack the facts. That the important thing for them is that they have a narrative, that they adhere to their narrative, and they continue to push the narrative. And eventually the narrative falls apart, as it will. But the issue is this. There's one thing when a narrative falls apart and it's Cuba or it's Syria, which is terrible for the Syrian people. Lots of people died, etc. It's another thing when it's China and Russia, because you start messing around on the Russian border, the Russians are going to defend their border, and they won't defend it with a narrative. They're going to defend it with artillery and hypersonic missiles. And narratives don't do really well against artillery and hypersonic missiles. And that's what the Ukrainians are finding out. I remember a while back, I kind of made a little bit of joke based on an old Russian joke. But basically what I said was, there were a bunch of there were a couple of Ukrainian soldiers there, on the line. Missiles, bombs are falling, artillery's falling around, and they called for headquarters and said, "We need backup. Can you get us out of here? Evacuation, anything." And headquarters called back and said, "Well, the bad news is we have no backup. We can't evacuate out there. You're doomed. The good news is we're winning the information war on Twitter." That's it. That's what they got. They're winning the information war on Twitter. That's what they're trying to do, and they're successful in what they're doing. But at some point, artillery kind of wins over an effective tweet from some guy with a freaking dog as his his profile picture.
A Shiba Inu.
Yeah, right. I'll take an artillery round over a Shiba Inu any day of the week, Scott.
Yeah, and but even the narrative is crumbling as well. I mean, even today, I believe it was the Russia Special Investigative Committee announced a probe into what seems to be a never-ending scandal, which is the Hunter Biden Burisma scandal. But they're opening a criminal probe into the possibility or the likelihood that, although we don't know if it's related to the specific Crocus City Hall attack, they're saying that Burisma has been involved in financing terrorism inside of Russia. Scott, what do you make of this in light of this, as you said, this like constant narrative war that is so divorced from reality? How do you see this development? And maybe you could put it in the context of this larger search for the culprits of these attacks that are occurring in Russia recently, the Crocus attack.
Well, first of all, again, I'll fall back on what I've said all along, is that the Russians, while they are fully capable of spinning and they're fully capable of emphasizing certain facts and de-emphasizing other facts, very rarely, and I would say to the point of I can't say I am cognizant of anything in recent history. Very rarely do they invent facts. And so when you have this investigative body coming out and saying that they have found a link between Burisma, which is an energy holding company in Ukraine, and the Crocus City Hall attack, there's a link there. Now, that link could be tenuous or that link could be rock solid. I can't tell based upon that statement, but I am convinced, based upon my years of watching Russian press, that there is a link. They found a link. Now, to take that the next step and say that this means that Hunter Biden and Joe Biden were involved, I say no. That's sort of that's a speculation that could be made upon past connectivity. But the Russians didn't say that Hunter Biden and the President Biden were involved. They sort of was implied because of Burisma's connectivity with Biden in the past and its connectivity now, and they made it. So there's where Russia plays a little bit of a mind game, where they allow speculation to be made that otherwise normally would just be shut down. Because unless the world's gone really crazy, I don't think Hunter Biden was involved in the Crocus City Hall planning, and I don't think Joe Biden was either. I think at this stage they both have severed their ties with Burisma, and would prefer never to hear that again. But as a energy holding company, Burisma is where you go in Ukraine to launder money, and so it only makes sense if you're the Ukrainian intelligence service or you're a foreign intelligence service that you use this money laundering mechanism to cleanse the financing of the Crocus City Hall account. So one would think that Burisma would be smarter, but again, this shows that the Russians are very good at what they do. The forensics are very good. In that area of the world, it's difficult to move money without Russia knowing about it, because their intelligence services are plugged in, to an extraordinary degree. I think the Russians have this information. I think that the information might be a little tenuous. Yeah, it might not be fully developed, but I believe that they have something that says that allows an investigator to go attackers Burisma, and it's not a fantasy line. It's a real connecting of the dots, et cetera. I just don't know, how solid that line can be right now, or if it's sort of, sketchy. But there is a connection between the attackers and Burisma, and that I'm certain. And I'm also certain that the Russians, when they say that Ukrainian services were behind it, and now they've gone a step further, and that the hand of the West is behind it as well. I believe that 100% because the Ukrainian services can't do this kind of operation without assistance, guidance, and direction from Western intelligence.
I also believe this. I think that South Africa opened a can of worms, and here's what I mean. I think that the U.S. is always talking about, we've got norms and international law. They're accusing other people of violating international law, et cetera. So South Africa said, oh, well, great. Well, we'll go to go to court, and you like international law so much. Let's see how you like it when it's, when it is, brought to the attention that you may be in violation. Okay, here's my point. I think the time will come when the Russians, when they get, they may wait until after the special military operation. I don't know what their timing is on that, but I think that they're going to the people who did this, who sponsored this, are going to be really, really sorry, because what they've done now is they have now set the Russians upon a course of searching to see where all the dirty money's going in Ukraine and where this money's connected and how they can connect it to. I suspect that the time will come when the Russians will go to the ICJ themselves and say, okay, the Ukrainians were involved in terrorism. Russia was involved in terrorism in violation of, the U.S., Macron, whoever they have it on, in violation of, international law and UN, agreements, et cetera, et cetera. And here's our evidence. Now, don't get me wrong. The U.S. et al. Can all say, well, we're not going to abide by any of that. But when the Russians lay that out in the ICJ and say they were involved in terrorism, and here's the evidence, here's who did it, here's where the money came from, here's where we tracked it, we got this person to talk, and they lay the evidence out, it is going to be extremely embarrassing for the West, and it's going to put them in a difficult position. So I think the Russians' plan in the long term is to gather really, really solid evidence and expose it. And I would suspect maybe go to the ICJ and make a claim against the United States and whoever, maybe the UK, whoever did it, and force them to either come and answer for themselves or simply disregard and say, we're not going to get involved in it, and just finally once and for all say, we're going with the rules-based international order and we're going to ignore international law. So I think that's what's going to happen in the long term, and it's going to be ugly for the parties who are involved. And I'll add this, and I don't think the Russians, now that they've started going down that road of searching to see where all the dirty money is, I don't think they're going to stop. I think once they get to going down that road, they're going to find everything they can, and it's going to be interesting to see what they find.
Yeah, and perhaps we can close on the question of Ukraine with the developments around NATO. Lloyd Austin made it pretty clear in his babble that Putin was the reason why NATO is expanding. Yet at the same time, you have all of these attempts, it seems like. And I'm curious, Scott, on your assessment of this. There seems to be a lot of worry about Donald Trump winning the presidency and that changing the calculus of U.S. policy on Ukraine. There's also been, for example, we've talked about Emmanuel Macron and France kind of coming in and saying we need to send troops there, and kind of an argument that has been, at least for now, silenced in some ways. But still, all this talk about Ukraine membership, Putin is the reason why NATO has expanded, and you also have this kind of panic about Donald Trump. Does this mean anything, Scott, or is this simply some kind of distraction as they try to buy time? The United States and NATO tries to buy time in this conflict.
When I spoke to Russia's ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Antonov, he has a word he likes to use all the time. It's one of his favorite words, and he wishes that it existed. It's called predictability. He loves that word because with predictability, you don't need things to go your way, because his job as a diplomat is to formulate policy options. Policy options based upon what? Something that's predictable. Because if you have stability that brings predictability, then your policies, as you develop, can actually address them. The old saying, you can't solve a problem if you haven't accurately defined the problem. One thing you can say about the Biden administration, love them or hate them, they're predictable. There's a certain element of predictability built in, which allows Russia, for instance, the Biden administration is so very predictable on Ukraine that Russia has been able to sustain a singular policy approach towards Ukraine over the course of this conflict. They're not jumping all over the place, changing as the wind blows. Trump. I mean, there's a lot of people that say, Trump's going to pull out of NATO. No, he's not. No, he's not. First of all, he doesn't get to make that call. It's a treaty. Congress has to be, along with it. The president can make a recommendation, but if the Senate doesn't go along with it, we're not out of that treaty. And right now, staying in NATO is very popular in Congress. Look at Trump. He started by talking tough against NATO last time. Then he went to NATO, and next thing we know, he's saying, "I've made NATO stronger than ever before." I mean, which one is it, Donald? Is NATO a Cold War relic that no longer has relevance, or did you just make it stronger? That's sort of like unpredictable. And so now you're the Russians going, Trump's going to come in. What's he going to do? First of all, the notion that Donald Trump's going to pick up the phone, call Putin, and save the world is absurd, because what's he going to offer Putin? I mean, some people have put out, speculation about Donald Trump's peace plan in Ukraine, and they put out a stupid map that shows, demilitarized zone in Kharkov, Sumy, and all this area along the Russian border. But then it says the rest of Ukraine, and it goes down and shows Odessa. And I'm like, I can guarantee you that Russia would never allow a demilitarized zone that didn't include Odessa. It's stupidity. But now what happens? Trump puts it on the table, and the Russians look at it and go, no, that's not going to happen, boss. No. Is he going to go, oh, okay, let me be reasonable here. How do we work this? Or is he going to go, no, I'm Donald Trump. I told you what my plan is. I'm the great man. You're fired. And next thing you know, he's going to get into the, I need to make NATO the strongest alliance in the world. We have to stand up to the Russian threat. Wait a minute, just unpredictability. So I think Donald Trump is the worst thing in the world that could happen to American foreign policy from a predictability standpoint. It's a very dangerous thing. Now, sometimes unpredictability is good. Let's take what Donald Trump did in his approach to North Korea and their nuclear weapons. He broke free of that, and he followed through. Had he been given a chance to follow through, there may have been something, but he was betrayed by John Bolton, by Mike Pompeo, and others. So if Trump came in, and instead of trying to demand something of Russia alone, that's his solution. I'm gonna solve this. I'm gonna demand this of Russia. Boom. Instead, if he came to Russia and he said, "Hey, what do you want?" And and then, okay, if I give you that, if we do this, you want recognition of Crimea, you want recognition of them, you want Ukraine to be non-NATO and all that. What do I get? What do I get to come out and come on? Because that was his approach to North Korea. You want sanctions lifted, you want investment, you want normalized economy. What do I get? Denuclearization. And that was going to be the quid pro quo. I think that's off the table right now. But but there was a while there where it was on the table, and the North Koreans were serious about putting it on the table. I think if Trump approached Russia with a genuine understanding of the Russian perspective and what Russia needed and what he wanted from Russia. so that it was a genuine horse trade. And he was willing to stick to that predictability, put something on the table that isn't going to change every time the wind blows, predictability, then Russia could deal with that. But Trump isn't capable of that. He's just all over the map. He's all about me. He's the giant ego. And the moment he puts forward a policy directive that gets challenged, that gets pushed back, he has to come up and fire and fury, pound the table. We're going to nuke you. You know, you can't go against America. And I don't think Trump solves anything. I know NATO's frightened of this, but let me also say this. When it comes to Ukraine, I think the Ukrainian crisis is going to be resolved. If Donald Trump wins the election, it's going to be resolved before the election, and it's definitely going to be resolved before he swears in as president. So as far as Ukraine is concerned, when it comes to Donald Trump, I don't think it matters. I think this is an issue that will be resolved well before Trump ever gets the term president in front of his name again.
Yeah, I agree with Scott. I think that the Russians are on course. You know, when I don't know how long it's going to be. You know, but I don't think much past. Of course, we said that last summer, but things are far different now. They're out of. They're running out of ammo in Ukraine. So, you know, it's hard for me to see this thing going past the summer. Once a couple more of these major towns fall, this thing's going to pieces. But I think to some extent, and I'm going to say this, if I were in the Russians, I would not be in a hurry. Same with China. You know what I mean? I would not be in a hurry for this reason. Ironically, the very plan for Ukraine by the neocons is what's coming back on them. Remember, it was supposed to weaken Russia. It was supposed to tie Russia up in there. Remember, they said, like Afghanistan, they'll be tied in there forever. Their people will get angry and turn on them. Oh, it's going to be terrible. All of those things are happening here in the United States. The United States, the US, the neocons are now tied up in there. Their people are now angry at them for all of the money that's being spent. So from one perspective, certainly with Russia, you don't want, you know, nobody wants to be in a war. Nobody wants to be losing people. But as time goes on, it's much more detrimental to the U.S. in the long run. Also, you know, it's very expensive to the U.S. and the Russians have taken, and the Chinese have taken the opportunity of this particular conflict to, and I'm going to say use it. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a constructive way, to use it to enlighten the people of the global South, to say, look at these people, look at who they are. And I think the global South, as a result of this conflict, mainly now Gaza, we're going to get on that, but have really migrated towards, for a number of reasons, have migrated towards Russia and China. So the longer it goes on, it's strengthening Russia and China. It's strengthening their relationships with the global South, and it's giving them time to build their economies, to break away. It's giving them time to break away, to work on breaking away as much as they can from the U.S. economy and redirect their commodities and their things that they sell to other parts of the world. So, you know, in reality, if I'm the Russians, I'm not in a hurry at all. I'm taking my time. It's hurting you far worse than it's hurting me. I'm winning. I just keep going along with this thing, as we say on the boats, maintain course and speed.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.